is not good enough. Okay? But then all of a sudden, you know, they're teenagers or whatever, and somebody says, hey, try some of this stuff. This is good stuff, man. Come on, give it a hit, or whatever. And they do it. They don't know that their reward center's messed up. But all of a sudden now they do it, and it's like, wham, I love that stuff. I got to have some more of that. Can't get enough of that. This is a person who's going to become addicted. Okay? The problem is, of course, that when you're a teenager, we don't know if you have lower than normal activity in your reward center or not. You don't know that until you use the drug, you know. So about the best advice we can give folks is that we think maybe some of this is genetic. So if you have a family member that had addictions of some kind, and by the way, this can be addiction of any kind. This is not only methamphetamine. We think that this is the case with methamphetamine, alcohol, cocaine, Valium, opiates, doesn't really matter. Any of these drugs, we think it's the same kind of thing. So these folks don't have any idea that they're at risk for addiction. But but like a lot of teenagers, you start experimenting, you think nothing can happen to me, just one time I'm going to hit it, it's not a big deal. Next thing you know, you have an addiction. And, that's the scary part. Maybe someday we can do a scan, for everybody, like the scan I was just telling you about, and it'll be good enough that we can say, hey, if you use any of these drugs, you got about a 1 in 2 chance of becoming addicted. I don't know if that would help people or not, but maybe it would. Maybe folks would say, 50-50 chance. I don't think I'm taking those odds, I don't know. But suffice it to say, though, that you got to realize there's a part of the brain, there's several parts of the brain. I'm going to go into the next one in a second. But this reward center is one part of the brain that's not working right in folks with risk for addiction. I think I made this clear, but you understand that it's not the drug that causes the reward center not to work. The reward center is not working to start with. Then when you get the drug, that's what the combination of those two things leads to addiction. Does that make sense? I guess that's kind of a key point. I don't want you thinking that the drug somehow damages the reward center and then that is what leads to the addiction. That's not what we think happens. Now, how does that, I guess before we leave the reward center, they've done some more research that's kind of neat, and I'll go ahead and go into this. It's they were trying to figure out, now, why would the reward center be, what's causing it to be abnormal, okay? Now, I would imagine that this again, genetics is probably one thing, but they wanted to know is the environment, because can the environment play a role in this? Can you start out with a normal reward center, and then something in your environment can damage it or affect it in some way, which would then set you up for addiction, okay? So they did this study with monkeys. Listen to this one. This is kind of interesting. They took these little baby monkeys and they raised them in isolation, okay, by themselves completely. Now, to a monkey, that's a pretty stressful thing. Probably to a human as well, I would think. Human babies, they need contact. They need to be cared for and all this. Well, these monkeys, they raised them in isolation, okay? Then they took them after they were so old. I don't know what, probably teenage monkey age. I don't know what that is, but not as long as our lives, of course. And they took them and they put them in with each other. Mix them all in together, okay? Well, as monkeys will often do, and humans do the same kind of thing, they developed into a hierarchy. So there were some monkeys who became dominant and some monkeys who became submissive, okay? Interesting enough, when these little monkeys were raised in isolation, after they, right before they put them in together, they scanned their brains and they looked to see if their reward center was normal or not. And sure enough, all of them, every single one of them had a lower than normal reward center. Okay? So then they put them all together, and they wanted to see what would happen. So they looked at the dominant monkeys, and they looked at the submissive monkeys. The dominant ones, their reward centers kind of came back to normal. So the reward center in those monkeys were working pretty much like a normal monkey that had never been raised in isolation. Okay? Then the submissive ones, they didn't change, so they stayed kind of low. Their reward centers weren't working as well at all. Okay? Then they took these monkeys and they gave them, all of them, cocaine, okay? The ones that were raised in isolation became dominant and had normal reward centers. They could take it or leave it. So they didn't really hit the bar and say, I want more cocaine, I want more cocaine. They didn't really, they hit it once, that was it. The submissive monkeys that didn't have enough of this reward center, the reward center wasn't working very well, they hit the cocaine over and over and over. As a matter of fact, in animal studies, it's been shown that sometimes animals will hit cocaine over and over again and ignore completely their food and water to the point to where they die. So that tells you how powerful that these drugs are. But in any case, the theory here is that some kind of stressor in the environment takes a brain that maybe would have started out normal and messes up the reward system in a certain way and then sets them up for addiction. Okay? Now let's think about that for a second. Now this is monkeys, I'll grant you that. Okay? But certainly if the same thing held true for humans, I mean, what would this mean? This might mean, just theoretically, it might mean that if we could decrease abuse in childhood, or we could decrease neglect, or we could decrease stress in some way in these folks' lives, maybe they wouldn't be as at risk for addiction when they become teenagers and start to experiment. And then they experiment, I can take it or leave it, and then this person maybe has been saved from a lifelong addiction. I'm probably taking this a step too far, but let me tell you, this all stuff isn't my idea. I heard this lecture from Nora Volkow, who is she's a doctor, she's a psychiatrist, she's the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And so she had given this lecture and it summarized all this stuff, and then I sort of took it and I'm trying to make it into sort of plain English to bring it to the masses, so to speak. Okay, she was basically lecturing to psychiatrists and would use all the lingo and all that, but I'm taking it down and trying to explain it. And hopefully it's making sense, because it was pretty powerful to me. I listened to this and I thought, man, how could I blame somebody? But their brain wasn't working like it should. How could I blame somebody for that? Well, that was her point too. Okay, so is the stress the only thing? And like I said earlier, it's probably not the only thing. So there's probably some genetic risk too. So if you have a family history, like I was saying earlier, if you have a family history of somebody in your family that's had addiction, and that, I don't care if it's alcohol, I don't care what it is, but some kind of addiction, you probably ought not to use. Okay, it's like Russian roulette. You don't know if your brain's wired that way or not. But it's a higher chance that it is wired that way if you have somebody in your family that had addiction, because you know their brains are wired that way. Okay? Or they wouldn't be addicted. Okay? Now, it's not all that simple. Okay? There are some people who use a certain drug over and over again, and they end up, this really doesn't get them high anymore. So they keep using even though they don't get high anymore. So think for a second about that. That's probably not just the reward center thing, right? Because if they're not getting that experience of, hey, this feels really good, that means the reward center is probably, there's something. That's not the issue, okay? Because it's not sending them the message, man, I love that stuff. But there's some reason they're continuing to use, okay? It turns out there's a pathway besides just the reward center. There has to be the reward center tells you it's good, I want to do it again, or it's bad, I don't want to do it again. That's pretty much as simple as it gets. But there's another part of the brain and it's right above, it's the frontal part of the brain, right above the eyeballs, and it's called the orbital, it means right above, orbit basically is the eyes. Frontal, which is the front part of the brain, cortex, okay? That part of the brain does a lot of things. One of the things it does is it gives us the ability to not do something that we know is not good for us, okay? The reward center just says, hey, I love it, I want to do it, okay? The front part of your brain has to kick in and say, yeah, but you might lose your kids. Or yeah, but I might end up in jail. Yeah, but I'm going to lose my job, okay? That's the part of the brain that I think, that's the part I was just talking about, hey, I'm blaming folks with addiction. Well, so the theory is, okay, is that part of the brain messed up? Are these folks is it not quite as easy for them to just say, I see the beer there, but I've had issues with alcohol, I'm not going to drink it. If this part of your brain, I was just telling you about, if it's not working like it should, then theoretically these folks would have a harder time doing that. Okay? Maybe you might call that willpower. I don't know what you call it, but that's one thing that people say in the lay public is, if you just have better willpower. Well, it could be that the center of the willpower isn't working very well. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, if your brain's wired a certain way, I don't know that I can blame somebody for the way their brain's wired. I mean, I don't know if you guys can either. I mean, I don't think it's probably wise to do that.